Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this series of talks on Cataloguing Ethics, organized by the ARLIS UK Cataloguing and Classification Committee. Today is the start of the series, and we're beginning it with a talk on the Cataloguing Code of Ethics, 2021, Conception, Community, and Continuation, from two people who are part of the Cataloguing Ethics Steering Committee, Diane Pennington and Jane Daniels. Jane Daniels was Bibliographic Librarian at Cardiff Metropolitan University, where she cataloged a range of resources and also managed metadata received from system, content, and service providers. She was a member of the Wales Higher Education Libraries Forum Cataloguing and Metadata Group, the Jisc NBK Phase 2 Task and Finish Group for Metadata Quality and Standards, Plan M, and the Libris Community Zone Management Group. She's a member of the joint USA, Canadian, and UK Cataloguing Ethics Steering Committee, who, working with the cataloging community, produced the Cataloguing Code of Ethics in 2021. She's the immediate past chair of the CILIP Metadata Discovery Group, previously the Cataloguing and Indexing Group. And Diane Pennington is Senior Lecturer in Information Science and the ILS Course Director at the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow. She teaches modules in Organization of Knowledge, Cataloging, and Library Systems. Her research areas include library linked data, hashtags, and classifying user engagement on social media. She's the chair of CILIP's Metadata and Discovery Group, previously the Cataloguing and Indexing Group. She's a member of the Cataloguing Ethics Steering Committee, as well as IFLA's SAA Training and Education in Subject Access Working Group. There will be a chance for questions afterwards, so please do put any questions you'd like to ask into the Q&A. And now I'll hand over to Jane and Diane.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you to ARLIS, the Cat and Class Committee, for setting up this series of talks. I think if ever there was a hot topic, it's this one in cataloguing at the moment. So thank you for this opportunity to talk about the code. And I very much look forward to the rest of the series of talks. Now, Mary's just done a marvelous job in introducing Diane and myself, so I'm not going to say anything more about myself. Diane, I don't know if you want to say anything else at this point.
No, just want to agree with you that I'm really happy that we're doing this today and that we're getting so much attention for our work and looking forward to it and the rest of the series as well. So I think I'll let you get started. And
thank you very much. Okay, well, this is the agenda for Diane and my talk today. We're going to do a little bit of a canter through the conception of the Cataloguing Code of Ethics. The initial community involvement. We're going to spend a little bit of time on the 10 statements of ethical principles, and then we're going to double back and think about how you can help us to continue with this initiative. And then, as Mary said, there'll be time for questions and hopefully our answers at the end of that. So just to give you a little bit of background and context for the code itself. So the code is allied to critical cataloguing, which is really a logical offshoot of the critical librarianship movement. So this calls on library workers to acknowledge the systems of power and privilege that really underpin the profession. And this is in an effort to challenge and change those systems. So critical cataloguing focuses on mitigating the ways in which classification and the organization of knowledge codify systems and hierarchies of oppression. So what we're really doing is encouraging people to think about what they're doing, why they're doing it, and also build into that, do we have the workforce to do this work? How can we engage our communities? How can we make sure that our communities are represented within the workforce? So as background for the ALA annual 2017 event that you can see on the screen there, Hope Olsen is part of a proud tradition of people working with knowledge and information management who started to really question what had gone on in the past and our standards. And in particular, in 2002, she published The Power to Name, Locating the Limits of Subject Representation in Libraries. And this was something that obviously ALA and CAMS in particular thought merited, over a period of years, merited the more thought, more workshops. How can we counter the things that have been identified as being deleterious to the profession, really? And gave us back some agency in what we do. We have tremendous power as cataloguers and metadata managers, whether we work in libraries or whether we work for the companies that often sell content or services to libraries. So the idea was to have this event at ALA in 2017 and start talking about how we could perhaps move towards having a specific code for cataloguers working in the information profession. And there was a great reaction to it and a definite groundswell in favour of creating a Cataloguing Code of Ethics. So the ALA Midwinter 2018 forum set about gathering detailed views of people. What should be in the code? What areas should it cover of our work? And how should it be created? So I'd been monitoring what was going on at ALA with regard to cataloguing ethics. And I was on the CIG committee, as it was then, the Cataloguing and Indexing Group. And I asked if I could approach CAMS about us joining forces with our colleagues in North America to actually work on putting the code together so that we could lend our experience in the UK to the vast array of experience of colleagues in North America. And because we made that request, it was then decided, maybe we should approach our colleagues in Canada, and that way we could have a three-way discussion to try and work on the code. And all of this was successful. And in February 2019, we had our first meeting of the Cataloguing Ethics Steering Committee, which did indeed include members from the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. So this is the current membership of the Cataloguing Ethics Steering Committee. You can see I'm down there as Cardiff Metropolitan University. I recently retired from that post as of the 8th of April. But I am continuing my work with CESC. It's been a real journey for me, made me think very deeply about our profession and just made me more passionate about what we do, who we work with, and how we can do things in collaboration. So this is where we talk about the community involvement. There always has been a strong community involvement in the code. We knew that we needed to tap into people's vast experience, their lived experience, their cultural sensibilities, all of that, which we apply on a daily basis, often without even thinking about it. So in April 2019, we put out a call for volunteers to participate in 6 focused working groups, and each of them had an elected chair, or sometimes chairs, because people wanted to share the responsibility, which was great. And each of us on the steering committee acted as a liaison between the working group and our own committee. And we were flabbergasted, really. We had over 100 volunteers respond to take part in these working groups, which I think is fantastic. I've already covered really why we needed to have the working groups. We wanted to be able to involve people's experience, give them a voice. And we were delighted really that the working group members, yes, predominantly from the USA, Canada and UK, but also colleagues from Australia, Israel and Mexico. And they worked in a variety of institutions from national, academic and public libraries, as well as in museums. So, you know, this was more than we could have hoped for, really. So the working group topics covered the sort of traditional critical cataloguing focuses, really, which was around authority work, classification, subject headings, controlled vocabularies. So every day when we're using these tools and standards, we will come up against ethical dilemmas, and we're quite resilient, I think. Our path, you know, our role in information work, we're quite resilient. We have to absorb all of this work of these standards. We have to know about them. We have to be able to apply them. So quite often, all of these things will be going through our heads as soon as something pops up on the screen that we catalogue, or something arrives on the desk, whether it be a book, an object, whatever it might be. And you can see that we had, ultimately, out of the 100, we had just over 70 people involved in the working groups. Now, this is where we sort of broke ground a little bit with the critical cataloguing emphasis, certainly that I perceived. So we started to think, okay, well, we know that we've got those standards to resolve, you know, issues with those standards to resolve, keep them up to date, make them respectful, make them more responsive. But then we had to think about, well, we don't work in isolation. Quite often now, certainly in the academic sphere, we work with a range of companies. They're selling us systems, they're selling us content, they're providing metadata or services to do with maintaining metadata. So we don't work in a vacuum. And certainly there'll be people working with who are cataloging and managing metadata in those commercial environments. So what we really wanted to do was make sure that we were providing a code that everyone could use. And then, of course, if you look at what we want to do ultimately, we can't, we need to look at staffing and work conditions. So if we're going to do all this marvelous work and use the increasingly technological tools that we have at our disposal to improve the search and discovery and access for our users, then we're quite often doing this within a very pressured environment in terms of how many staff we have, how much money is at our disposal. And we want people from the communities that we represent to be on our workforce so that we can actually make sure that the metadata and the cataloging is respectful and is fit for purpose, really, and allows us to bridge the gap that sometimes can exist between what we want to make accessible to the communities that we serve. So in terms of the working group contributions then, they worked really, really hard and to very stringent deadlines, really. So in July 2019, we finalised the group membership and they elected leaders. And then between August, December 2019, the groups focused on their assigned area and they produced a report for the steering committee. And our initial goal of the committee was to have a draft of the Code of Ethics for cataloguers available on a Google Doc, so completely open access, published for public comment by April 2020, but then COVID-19 hit. So what happened then? Well, again, I think we made really good progress, really. January to June 2020, we reviewed the working group reports and wrote the first draft of the code. And then in June 2020, it was presented to the ALCTS in the ALA Virtual Interest Group Week. And we had 38 comments during the actual session when it was presented. And then from June to August 2020, the draft was out there for public comment. We had 68 comments. And we discussed all of this feedback and revised the document accordingly. And then September to October 2020, we produced a second draft and launched the consultation at the CILIP MDG 2020 online conference, actually. And I was looking back through the comments the other day, 117 comments received on the second draft. And so that was quite a lot of work for us to do, but we went through each and every comment, looked at the text, thought about the arguments that, well, the discussions, we will call them arguments, that went on in the comments. And then in January 2021, we published the final version on the CESC website. And now I think, Diane, you're going to take up the baton.
Just okay, I've got control of the screen now, so that worked. Yeah, so thanks for that introduction and the context, Jane. It's really helpful, I think, for everyone to kind of see how we got to where we are now. And we'll come back to this later to kind of give an update on where we are currently and what happens next. But first, what I'd like to be able to do here is to give everyone an overview of the documents in case you haven't had a chance to look at it already. There is a link to it in the chat if you scroll up, or we can put it out again. Victoria, if you wouldn't mind maybe putting a link to the document again in the chat, just in case anyone who has come in late didn't receive it. So right now we'll just go through the structure and the 10 statements, and then finally sort of do a bit of comparison of some examples that Jane has come up with, which I think are really great to illustrate how these can be helpful in the practice of doing the kind of cataloging that you do. Although in terms of subject specialty, I'm sure you're way beyond any of us that are presenting today, either one of us. But yes, yes, Jane's screen should still be showing. I've just requested control of it so I can go through this part of the presentation, which is the part that I'm presenting. So thanks for that question. So the structure of where it is now is, as Jane said at the beginning, it is intentionally short, and it's meant to inform and aid decision-making and practice. So we spend a lot of time trying to do a lot of structuring around, what are we introducing? What is it that we tried to do? And how this can be played into different kinds of contexts, different kinds of libraries and different people who might be doing cataloging. So not just in libraries, but also hopefully for vendors and people who work on standards and people working independently and so on. So the scope of it is to create systemic change. Catalogers require institutional support. We accept that every workplace is different and responses to ethical situations are necessarily framed by those local contexts. And so it's just a way, again, just a framework, not meant to be overly specific, overly detailed, intentionally short, to be used in a variety of settings. And what I'm going to go through here is part 2 of the code, which is the 10 statements of ethical principles. So again, it's not a checklist, it's not instructions, it's just a way for us to reflect on our policy and practices and to make sure that we're doing things ethically as much as we're able to do so. So they're not in any particular order of importance. Again, they're just guidance and ways for us to continue to think about how we can catalog ethically and critically and appropriately. So, the first statement is that we catalog resources in our collections with the end user in mind to facilitate access and promote discovery. And as I said, Jane has put examples here from sort of art library kinds of settings to maybe help you think about, or maybe give us some feedback during the Q&A session around situations that you might have encountered where you could have used these, or where these would be useful, and what you would do with them or could have done with them if you had them. That the art libraries and design areas are very rich in these kinds of resources where there's a lot of original cataloging to be done. It's not quite the same as a book that gets released around the world and people can download the records. So you do have to do a lot of unique work, and so the context is important, and helping people understand exactly where these things came from, and how can we make this? Is there a way to make this more collaborative among those of you who work in this sector, this part of the sector, to help us understand the best ways to do this. So again, your users are going to be different potentially from other types of collections that are not as specific in terms of creativity and design, and what are the needs of those people in terms of describing those kinds of rich resources that are visual or otherwise. We commit to describing resources without discrimination, whilst respecting the privacy and preferences of their associated agents. So I know that not everyone today is in the UK, but we do have a name authority cooperative program here called NACO. And this is specifically meant for addressing issues of name authority records. But the issues around name authority records gets really difficult for various reasons. For any of you who have worked with authority records or maybe create them, you'll understand what I mean there. But we have to kind of find ways to make sure that we are being respectful of underrepresented groups and people that may be presented in different ways, and different kinds of requirements in terms of personal and corporate names that go into our authority records, and how we use those and how they tie to their bibliographic entities. We acknowledge that we bring our biases to the workplace. Therefore, we strive to overcome personal, institutional, and societal prejudices in our work. I'm not sure how many of you have had training on unconscious bias, which I've actually just recently completed. We're required to do unconscious bias training every few years at my university. So I just actually went through this. And so it's fresh in my mind once again, which is really great. But how do we make sure that we are doing, critically cataloging things from the Black Arts movement or from other minority groups that may not be so-called Western, or have those certain unconscious bias issues that we might have around white privilege and these kinds of things that come up in unconscious bias training. If you haven't done unconscious bias training, I would really recommend it, because it can really, I think, help you implement some of these issues, to at least be aware of the fact that we all do have bias, and to do our best to try to work around them when we're cataloging materials or describing people, or groups of people. We recognize that interoperability and consistent application of standards help our users find and access materials. However, all standards are biased. We will approach them critically and advocate to make cataloging more inclusive. So again, we've had some of the ARLIS NA work. I'm sure our colleagues here from ARLIS can talk more about those if you're interested. But we do have problematic issues around, certain names that we've traditionally used. And then there was the illegal aliens subject heading, for example, that you might have remembered from the States, that was based on that documentary Changing the Subject. And go look that up if you haven't already. We support efforts to make standards and tools financially, intellectually, and technologically accessible to all catalogers, and developed with evidence-based research and stakeholder input. So this is a particular interest to me because, for example, I know there are a lot of people working in smaller libraries or just don't have the funding to be able to purchase access to the RJ toolkit, for example. And so that's an issue for people that don't have access to it. I know librarians here in Scotland who are still working with the original print version of RDA from 2015 because their library can't pay for access to the online subscription for the toolkit. And so that's just one example of many of what we can use to help people that need to have access to current standards and having the technical resources to be able to do so. We take responsibility for our cataloging decisions and advocate for transparency in our institutional practices and policies. So if do you have local policies that guide your cataloging that the public can have access to, that people might be able to comment on, and if they have questions around how different kinds of content is covered, anything that might be sensitive or potentially harmful, or how do we handle this? And another thing I'm interested in this as well is how do we what's the relationship between this and intellectual freedom, and how do we respect freedom while also being sensitive to things that might be harmful or difficult for people to deal with. So whatever we do, our policies need to reflect that, and then they need to be shown in the practices in the metadata that we're actually creating. We collaborate widely to support the creation, distribution, maintenance, and enrichment of metadata in various environments and jurisdictions. So issues around aggregated data services where, sorry about the noise, I have a puppy and she's playing with her squeaky hippo. So if you hear any squeaks, I apologize. So looking at how different aggregated services are working together, issues around copy cataloging, and linked open data, and how that will actually work into connecting. And that's actually one of my research areas, is looking at the use of linked data in libraries and how, even though they're meant to be standards, they don't always work well because we're still implementing standards in different ways that may or may not be interoperable. So we need to look at that a bit more carefully to make sure that we're facilitating collaboration between different libraries and other locations as much as we can. We insist on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace. We promote education, training, equitable pay, and a fair work environment for everyone who catalogs, so they can continue to support search and discovery. So we have a lot of EDI initiatives. I know in the States and Canada, I don't know as much about other countries in this area, but can we see the puppy? Well, if I can pull her away from the ball she's ripping apart at the moment, I will try before the end of the webinar. But what we're looking at it, in the MDG committee currently, is we have a subcommittee looking at creating a sort of a subset of the base of knowledge that's so wide range and within metadata discovery and cataloging, and how we how that basically, if we have a more detailed document that shows the breadth of work that we do in this part of our field, that can be used for advocacy work, for explaining to management why we need equitable pay, why we still need to employ people with our expertise, and so on. So I think that in addition to diversity and inclusion and equity, that we can also use this for the benefit of all of us who catalog, to make sure that we're not looked over as an area of the sector. And which also relates to this as well. We advocate for the value of cataloging work within our organizations and with external partners. And so this has to do a lot with relationships with the vendors and the publishers, or anybody who's providing records or services related to these things. And what can we do to make sure that we're working externally to benefit ultimately the end users of what we create. And some examples of this has been that some of us, including Jane and myself, have been working with NISO Plus, along with our colleague Emma Booth, who knows a lot about shelf-ready metadata for ebooks and other areas. And so by going to some of these conferences, we're going to UKSG, I think it's like next month. It's got rescheduled because of the pandemic, presenting to different audiences where we can reach publishers and other stakeholders in metadata creation, so that we can start to work out how some of these relationships can work better together to benefit everyone in the end. And the last one is that we work with our user communities to understand their needs in order to provide relevant and timely services. And this was an example that Jane found, which was really interesting, around Scandinavian artist books, that kind of shows how artists and librarians are working together. Again, sorry for the squeaky toy. So this is to promote knowledge exchange between librarians, artists, and the public, to make sure that different people have different needs in terms of the kinds of metadata or cataloging records that they would need to use. So it's really helpful to understand the sort of vocabularies and access points that the artists would need, as well as the public who don't have the specialized expertise in the area, to be able to have the right type of metadata for the right types of users that will be using the records. So with that, I will turn it back over to Jane, and she'll let you know kind of where we are currently and what comes next.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, Diane. Right, so I'm just going to follow up very quickly now. We're just going to explain where we are with the continuation aspect of all of this work, really. So what we're doing at the moment is seeking endorsement by our professional bodies in the UK, Canada, and the United States. And you can see that we've already gained 2 of those. So in November 2021, ALA formally adopted and endorsed the Cataloguing Code of Ethics, which is brilliant. And then just recently, actually, I think it was on the 31st of March, Diane and I attended the Board of Trustees, where the CILIP board formally endorsed the Cataloguing Code of Ethics on behalf of the UK information profession. So there should be a formal announcement imminent on this. And what we've asked is that the document can be linked into the CILIP Ethics Hub to make it just apparent that as catalogers and metadata managers, we have quite specific responsibilities in terms of ethics. In Canada, the code is being translated into French for the Francophone community, and there are going to be regional consultation exercises projected to end in December 2023, at the end of which we hope that there'll be formal endorsement. And once we do get that endorsement, we hope to present the code to IFLA. We're not going to hand it over and say, here we are, we've done it for you, let's all adopt this. The idea is obviously that we present this as a starter for 10, if you like, in terms of cataloguing ethics, to promote discussion at the global level, which will hopefully and ultimately produce an international cataloguing code of ethics. And this is where really we need your help, your continuing help, as we try to help other people to think about their circumstances, their relationships. How can they learn from other people who may have already come up against certain ethical dilemmas? So this is why we always wanted the code to include short case studies as a sort of separate part. And really what we want is for you to consider what kind of dilemmas have you faced? It can be on any of the topics that the working groups worked on, or indeed anything else that you think could be added to that list of focus groups. What did you come up against? How did you resolve it or attempt to resolve it? And all the submissions are anonymized, so we're just putting that out there now so that you know, people can feel confident that they can submit on that basis. And also, we recently got back in touch with our working groups to ask if we could make their reports to the CESC available on the website. And thankfully, all the groups that have been approached thus far, I think we're just awaiting one group to come back to us, but everyone was fully in favour of this. So that's brilliant news. And just to finish off, really, we've already had the code, or the code has already been translated into Greek. And that's actually available up on the CESC website. So the community often obviously thought, well, this is a good starting point for us. We want to make it more accessible to our colleagues in Greece. And so they've done that work, and they just asked us if that was okay. And we said, yes, that's fine. We're delighted. Please go ahead. And we've had a permission sought from a working group member actually to translate into Portuguese for the benefit of the Lusophone community. So again, that's something that should come on stream fairly soon. And I think really that's about it in terms of the presentation.